James II, who reigned as King of Scots from 1437 on, was the son of James I and Joan Beaufort. Nothing is known of his early life, but by his first birthday his twin and only brother, Alexander, who was also the older twin, had died, thus making James the heir apparent and Duke of Rothesay. Curiously enough, James held no other titles while Duke of Rothesay. On February 21, 1437, James I was assassinated and the 6-year-old Duke of Rothesay immediately succeeded him as James II. In 1449, 19-year-old James married 15-year-old Mary of Guelders, daughter of the Duke of Gelderland. She bore him 7 children, 6 of whom survived into adulthood. Subsequently, the relations between Flanders and Scotland improved. James's nickname, Fiery Face, referred to a conspicuous vermilion birthmark on his face which appears to have been deemed by contemporaries an outward sign of a fiery temper. James was a politic, and singularly successful king. He was popular with the commoners, with whom, like most of the Stuarts, he socialized often, in times of peace and war. His legislation has a markedly popular character. He does not appear to have inherited his father's taste for literature, which was inherited by at least 2 of his sisters. But the foundation of the University of Glasgow during his reign, by Bishop Turnbull, shows that he encouraged learning. And there are also traces of his endowments to St. Salvator's, the new college of Archbishop Kennedy at St. Andrews. He possessed much of his father's restless energy. However, his murder of the Earl of Douglas leaves a stain on his reign. Early reign: James I was assassinated on February 21, 1437. The Queen, although hurt, managed to get to her 6-year-old son, who was now king. On March 25, 1437, the 6-year-old was formally crowned King of Scots at Holyrood Abbey. The Parliament of Scotland revoked alienations of crown property and prohibited them, without the consent of the estates, that is, until James II's 18th birthday. He lived along with his mother and 5 of his 6 sisters at Dunbar Castle until 1439. From 1437 to 1439 the king's first cousin Archibald Douglas, 5th Earl of Douglas, headed the government as Lieutenant General of the realm. After his death, and with a general lack of high-status earls in Scotland due to deaths, forfeiture or youth, political power became shared uneasily among William Crichton, First Lord Crichton, Lord Chancellor of Scotland, and Sir Alexander Livingston of Callander, who had possession of the young king as the warden of the stronghold of Stirling Castle. Taking advantage of these events, Livingston placed Queen Joan and her new husband, Sir John Stuart, under house arrest at Stirling Castle on August 3, 1439. They were released on September 4 only by making a formal agreement to put James in the custody of the Livingstons, by giving up her dowry for his maintenance, and confessing that Livingston had acted through zeal for the king's safety. In 1440, in the king's name, an invitation is said to have been sent to the young 6th Earl of Douglas and his brother, 11-year-old David, to visit the king at Edinburgh Castle in November 1440. They came, and were entertained at the royal table, from which they were treacherously hurried to their doom, which took place by beheading in the castle yard of Edinburgh on November 24. 3 days later Malcolm Fleming of Cumbernauld, their chief adherent, shared the same fate. This infamous incident took the name of the Black Dinner. Struggles with the Douglases. In 1449 James II reached adulthood, yet in many ways his active kingship differed little from his minority. The Douglases used his coming of age as a way to throw the Livingstons out of the shared government, as the young king took revenge for the brief arrest of his mother that had taken place in 1439. Douglas and Crichton continued to dominate political power, and the king's ability to rule without them remained arguably limited. But James did not acquiesce with this situation without argument, and between 1451 and 1455 he struggled to free himself from the power of the Douglases. Attempts to curb the Douglases' power took place in 1451, during the absence of the Earl of Douglas from Scotland, and culminated with the murder of Lord Douglas at Stirling Castle on February 22, 1452. The main account of Douglas's murder comes from the Auchinleck Chronicle, a near-contemporary but fragmentary source. According to its account, the king accused the Earl of forging links with John MacDonald, 11th Earl of Ross, and Alexander Lindsay, 4th Earl of Crawford. This bond, if it existed, created a dangerous axis of power of independently minded men, forming a major rival to royal authority. When Douglas refused to break the bond with Ross, James broke into a fit of temper and stabbed Douglas 26 times and threw his body out of a window. His court officials then joined in the bloodbath, one allegedly striking out the Earl's brain with an axe. This murder did not end the power of the Douglases, but rather created a state of intermittent civil war between 1452 and 1455. The main engagements were at Brodick, on the Isle of Arran, Inverkip in Renfrew, and the Battle of Arkinholm. James attempted to seize Douglas lands, but his opponents repeatedly forced him into humiliating climdowns, whereby he returned the lands to James Douglas, 9th Earl of Douglas, and a brief and uneasy peace ensued. Military campaigns ended indecisively, and some have argued that James stood in serious danger of being overthrown, or of having to flee the country. But James's patronage of lands, titles and offers to allies of the Douglases saw their erstwhile allies begin to change sides, most importantly the Earl of Crawford after the Battle of Brechin, and in May 1455 James struck a decisive blow against the Douglases, and they were finally defeated at the Battle of Arkinholm. In the months that followed, the Parliament of Scotland declared the extensive Douglas lands forfeit and permanently annexed them to the Crown, along with many other lands, finances and castles. The Earl fled into a long English exile. James finally had the freedom to govern as he wished, and one can argue that his successors as kings of Scots never faced such a powerful challenge to their authority again. Along with the forfeiture of the Albany Stuarts in the reign of James I, the destruction of the Black Douglases saw royal power in Scotland take a major step forward. Energetic rule. Between 1455 and 1460 James II proved to be an active and interventionist king. Ambitious plans to take Orkney, Shetland and the Isle of Man nonetheless did not succeed. The king travelled the country and has been argued to have originated the practice of raising money by giving remissions for serious crimes. It has also been argued that some of the unpopular policies of James III originated in the late 1450s. In 1458 an Act of Parliament commanded the king to modify his behaviour, but one cannot say how his reign would have developed had he lived longer. James II is the first Scots monarch for whom a contemporary likeness has survived, in the form of a woodcut showing his birthmark on the face. Marriage. In 1449, Mary of Guelders was recommended by Philip the Good as a suitable bride for James. The negotiations began in July 1447, when a Burgundian envoy came to Scotland, and were concluded by an embassy under Crichton the Chancellor in September 1448. Philip settled 60,000 crowns on his kinswoman, and her dower of 10,000 was secured on lands in Strathairn, Athol, Mphyn, and Linlithgow. A tournament took place before James at Stirling, on February 25, 1449, between James, Master of Douglas, another James, brother to the Laird of Lochleven, and two knights of Burgundy, one of whom, Jacques de la Lane, was the most celebrated knight-errant of the time. The marriage was celebrated at Holyrood on July 3, 1449. A French chronicler, Mathieu Scocci, gives a graphic account of the ceremony and the feasts which followed. Many Flemings in Mary's suite remained in Scotland, and the relations between Scotland and Flanders, already friendly under James I, consequently became closer. In Scotland the king's marriage led to his emancipation from tutelage, and to the downfall of the Livingstons. In the autumn Sir Alexander and other members of the family were arrested. At a parliament in Edinburgh on January 19, 1450, Alexander Livingston, a son of Sir Alexander, and Robert Livingston of Linlithgow were tried and executed on the Castle Hill. Sir Alexander and his kinsmen were confined in different and distant castles. A single member of the family escaped the general proscription. James, the eldest son of Sir Alexander, who, after arrest and escape to the Highlands, was restored in 1454 to the office of Chamberlain to which he had been appointed in the summer of 1449. Death. James II enthusiastically promoted modern artillery, which he used with some success against the Black Douglases. His ambitions to increase Scotland's standing saw him besiege Roxburgh Castle in 1460, one of the last Scottish castles still held by the English after the Wars of Independence. For this siege, James took a large number of cannons imported from Flanders. On August 3, he was attempting to fire one of these cannons, known as the Lion, when it exploded and killed him. Robert Lindsay of Pitscotty stated in his history of James's reign that as the king stood near a piece of artillery, his thigh bone was dug into with a piece of misframed gun that brake in shooting, by which he was stricken to the ground and died hastily. The Scots carried on with the siege, led by George Douglas, 4th Earl of Angus, and the castle fell a few days later. Once the castle was captured, James' widow, Mary of Guelders, ordered its destruction. James's son became king as James III and Mary acted as regent until her own death 3 years later. Issue: James married Mary of Guelders at Holyrood Abbey, Edinburgh, on July 3, 1449. They had 7 children, an unnamed son. James III of Scotland, Mary Stuart, Countess of Arran, Alexander Stuart, 1st Duke of Albany, David Stuart, Earl of Murray, John Stuart, 1st Earl of Mar and Garioch, Princess Margaret Stuart of Scotland. By his unknown mistress, James also left one illegitimate son, John Stuart, Lord of Styx. Fictional portrayals: James II has been depicted in plays, historical novels and short stories. They include The Captain of the Guard by James Grant. The novel covers events from 1440 to 1452. Mostly covering the conflict of James II with the Earls of Douglas. Part of the action takes place far from Scotland, at the court of Arnold, Duke of Guelders, father-in-law to the king. Two Penniless Princesses by Charlotte Mary Yonge. James II is a secondary character. The main characters are his sisters Eleanor, Mary, and Joan Jean. The novel covers their travels to foreign courts, including those of young Henry VI of England and Rena, copyright of Anjou. The Black Douglas by Samuel Rutherford Crockett and its sequel Maid Margaret. The two novels cover events from 1439 to 1460, including most of the reign of James II. His conflict with the Earls of Douglas is prominently featured, including James II stabbing William Douglas, 8th Earl of Douglas, to death and James' own death due to a bursting cannon at the siege of Roxburgh. Among the other historical figures depicted are William Douglas, 6th Earl of Douglas, and his brother David, Margaret Douglas, Fair Maid of Galloway, Sir Alexander Livingston of Calendar, William Crichton, 1st Lord Crichton, Charles VII of France and his Dauphin, but English events are only slightly touched. James II, Day of the Innocents by Rona Munro. A co-production between the National Theatre of Scotland, Edinburgh International Festival and the National Theatre of Great Britain. The James plays James I, James II and James III or a trio of history plays by Rona Munro. Each play stands alone as a vision of a country tussling with its past and future. This play focuses on the early life of James II, the developing relationships with the Douglas family and the eventual death of Lord Douglas. Black Douglas by Nigel Tranter covers events up to the killing of the 8th Earl of Douglas, is sympathetic to the Earl and unsympathetic to James II. Nicholas Squared Rising by Dorothy Dunnett mentions his intrigues and wars as part of the international milieu of the time, especially as they impact Flanders, the scene of the novel. Appears as a background character in the children's fantasy novel In the Keep of Time by Margaret J. Anderson. His nickname and the birthmark which inspired it are both described, and one of the main characters witnesses the Battle of Roxburgh Castle and the explosion of the lion that kills him. Ancestry. References. Sources: Colvin, H.M. Brown, R.A., The Royal Castles 1066 1485, The History of the King's Works. Volume 2, The Middle Ages, London, Her Majesty's Stationery Office, MacAndrew, Bruce A., Scotland's Historic Heraldry, Boydell and Brewer, ISBN 9781843832614, Nield, Jonathan, A Guide to the Best Historical Novels and Tales, Air Publishing, ISBN 978-0-8337, 2509-7, Mike Salter. Discovering Scottish Castles. Shire Publications Limited. ISBN 0-85263-749-7. Further reading, The Auchinleck Chronicle, printed in Magladary, James II, Appendix 2, pages 160-73. M. Brown, The Black Douglases. C. Magladary, James II, R. Tanner, The Late Medieval Scottish Parliament, Politics in the Three Estates, 1424-1488.